The Orient Express was real, but not as one single unchanging train on one single unchanging route. The train that became the most famous in history, the train that defined luxury rail travel, the train that inspired novels and movies and captured the world's imagination, it didn't exist. Not as a single train, not as a single route. What existed was something far more interesting. A brand, a myth, a constantly shifting network of trains and routes that adapted to wars, collapsed empires, and redrawn borders, all while maintaining the illusion that it was one unchanging, legendary service. This is the secret behind the Orient Express that nobody talks about, and once you understand it, you'll never think about the train the same way again. Before we pull back the curtain on this railway magic trick, let me ask you a question. When you think of the Orient Express, what do you picture? Probably a specific train, elegant dining cars, sleeping compartments with mahogany paneling, a route from Paris to Istanbul, Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot solving murders. That's the image, that's the legend. And it's not wrong exactly, but it's not the whole truth either. Because here's what most people don't know. The Orient Express wasn't a train, it was a brand name, a marketing concept, and over its nearly 100-year history, that brand was applied to dozens of different trains, running dozens of different routes, to dozens of different destinations. The route changed, the rolling stock changed, the destinations changed. Sometimes there were multiple trains all calling themselves the Orient Express, running completely different routes at the same time. But the legend stayed the same. This wasn't an accident, this was brilliant marketing. The Compagnie Internationale des Wagons Lits, the company that operated the Orient Express, understood something that modern brands are still learning. You don't sell a product, you sell a story, you sell an idea. And if you can keep that idea consistent, you can change everything else underneath it. You can adapt to wars, to politics, to changing borders and technologies, all while maintaining the illusion that nothing has changed. But here's the twist. This flexibility, this ability to constantly reinvent itself while maintaining the same name, is exactly what allowed the Orient Express to survive for so long. A train that was truly fixed, truly unchanging, would have died in World War I, or World War II, or during the Cold War. But the Orient Express survived all of those because it wasn't really a train, it was an idea, and ideas are much harder to kill than trains. Let's start at the beginning. June 5, 1883. The first Express d'Orient departs Paris for Vienna. Then on October 4, 1883, the service was extended toward Constantinople, running via Strasbourg, Munich, Vienna, Budapest and Bucharest to Giurgiu, where passengers crossed the Danube by ferry, continued to Varna, and then took a ship to Constantinople. It wasn't a direct train journey, it was a combination of trains, ferries, and ships. It was run as the Express d'Orient, and later the service was officially renamed the Orient Express. One seamless service, one brand. That's the first secret. From the very beginning, the Orient Express was never what it claimed to be. It was never a single train running from Paris to Istanbul. It was a coordinated service using multiple trains and other forms of transport, all operating under one brand name. But the marketing materials didn't emphasize the ferries and the transfers. They emphasized the luxury, the adventure, the exotic destination. They sold the idea, not the logistics, and it worked. The Orient Express became famous. Wealthy travelers booked tickets. Journalists wrote about it. The brand grew. But the Compagnie Internationale des Wagons Lits knew they had a problem. The route was complicated. The transfers were inconvenient. If they wanted the Orient Express to truly succeed, they needed a direct rail route from Paris to Istanbul. So they worked on it. They negotiated with railway companies across Europe. They pushed for new track construction. They lobbied governments. And in 1889, they achieved it. A direct rail route from Paris to Constantinople. No ferries, no ships, just train. This was the Orient Express as most people imagine it. The legendary route. The train that crossed an entire continent. But here's what's interesting. The 1889 route wasn't the same as the 1883 route. It went through different cities, it crossed different borders, but it was still called the Orient Express. Same name, different train, different route. The brand stayed consistent while the reality changed. And this pattern would repeat over and over for the next 90 years. The Orient Express route changed constantly, sometimes because of new railway construction that offered better routes, sometimes because of political changes that made old routes impossible, sometimes because the company saw an opportunity to serve new markets. But through all these changes, the name stayed the same. The brand stayed the same. The legend stayed the same. Let me give you some examples. By the 1920s and 30s, there wasn't just one Orient Express. There were parallel services, including the Simplon Orient Express, via Switzerland and Italy. There were multiple services, all using the Orient Express name. The original route through Vienna and Budapest. A new route through Switzerland and Italy, called the Simplon Orient Express. Another route through Germany and Romania, called the Aalborg Orient Express. All of them were Orient Express trains. All of them carried the same brand, but they went to completely different places. Think about that for a moment. You could board an Orient Express in Paris, and depending on which Orient Express you boarded, you could end up in Istanbul or Athens or Bucharest or Sofia. Same name, same brand, same promise of luxury. Completely different destinations. This would be like boarding a flight on American Airlines in New York and not knowing if you'd end up in Los Angeles, Miami, or Seattle until you were already in the air. But the company made it work. They marketed each route as part of the Orient Express network. They emphasized that no matter which Orient Express you took, you'd get the same level of luxury and service. The destination might change, but the experience wouldn't. It was brilliant branding, and it allowed them to adapt to changing markets and opportunities without diluting the brand. Then came World War I, and suddenly the Orient Express faced its greatest challenge. The route crossed the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was at war with France. The train couldn't run. The service stopped. For 4 years, the Orient Express didn't exist. The trains sat idle. The routes were used for military transport. The brand was dormant. But when the war ended in 1918, the Compagnie Internationale des Wagons-Lits faced a problem. The map of Europe had been completely redrawn. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had collapsed. New countries had appeared: Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia. The borders had changed. The old Orient Express routes didn't make sense anymore. Some of them crossed 4 or 5 new countries instead of 2 empires. Border controls had multiplied. Political tensions were high. So what did the company do? They adapted. They created new routes. The Simplon Orient Express, which went through Switzerland and Italy to avoid the unstable Balkans, became the main service. Other routes were adjusted to work with the new borders. Some were abandoned entirely. But the brand? The brand stayed the same. It was still the Orient Express. Still the legendary train, still the symbol of luxury and adventure. This is the second secret. The Orient Express survived World War I, not by staying the same, but by changing everything. The routes changed, the destinations changed, even the countries the train passed through changed. But because the brand stayed consistent, most passengers didn't notice or didn't care. They were still riding the Orient Express. That's what mattered. The 1920s and 30s were the golden age of the Orient Express. Multiple routes operated simultaneously. The Simplon Orient Express, the Aalborg Orient Express, the original route through Vienna and Budapest, all of them thriving, all of them carrying wealthy passengers, diplomats, spies, and adventurers, all of them contributing to the legend. And this is when the brand really solidified. Agatha Christie published Murder on the Orient Express in 1934. The novel captured the mystique of the train, the international passengers, the luxury, the mystery, and it cemented the Orient Express in popular culture. But here's what's interesting. Christie's novel doesn't specify which Orient Express route the train is on. It's deliberately vague, because by 1934, there were multiple Orient Express routes, and Christie knew that. She was writing about the brand, not a specific train. Then came World War II, and once again, the Orient Express stopped. The routes were disrupted, the trains were requisitioned, the service ended. But this time, when the war ended, the challenge was even greater. Europe wasn't just redrawn, it was divided. The Iron Curtain fell across the continent. Countries that had been connected by the Orient Express were now on opposite sides of the Cold War. The original route through Vienna, Budapest, and Bucharest? For Western travelers, it became drastically harder. Border controls, politics, and restrictions turned the old network into a logistical headache. Those cities were behind the Iron Curtain. Western passengers couldn't easily travel there. The Aalborg Orient Express through Germany? Germany was divided. The routes that had worked before the war didn't work anymore. The political map had changed so dramatically that the old Orient Express network was essentially dead. So the company adapted again. The Simplon Orient Express, which went through Yugoslavia, became the main service. Yugoslavia, under Tito, had broken with the Soviet Union and remained outside the Eastern Bloc. This made it possible for a Western train to pass through. But even this route was complicated. It required careful political navigation. The train had to cross borders between countries that were technically enemies. It was a diplomatic achievement as much as a transportation service. And here's the third secret. During the Cold War, the Orient Express survived not because it was a great train, but because it was a useful symbol. Both East and West wanted it to continue. For the West, it was proof that connections to the East were still possible. For the East, it was a source of hard currency and a propaganda tool showing they weren't completely isolated. The train became more valuable as a symbol than as transportation. But the reality was declining. By the 1960s, air travel was cheaper and faster. The Orient Express was losing passengers. The luxury was fading. The rolling stock was old. The service was declining. The legend was still there, but the reality was becoming shabby. The gap between the myth and the reality was growing. If you're finding this revelation about the Orient Express as fascinating as I am, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. And subscribe, because we've got more hidden truths about legendary trains coming your way. Trust me, how this story ends is even more interesting than how it began. By the 1970s, the Orient Express was dying. The various routes had been consolidated or cancelled. The Simplon Orient Express was the last service still using the name, and it was barely recognizable as the legendary train. The dining car was gone. The luxury was gone. It was just a regular international train with sleeping cars. The brand was still there, but it was hollow. On May 19, 1977, the last direct Orient Express service from Paris to Istanbul departed. It was the end of an era. The train that had defined luxury rail travel for nearly a century was gone. The routes were gone. The service was gone. Only the legend remained. But here's where the story gets really interesting, because the legend was so powerful, so embedded in popular culture, that it couldn't die. The Orient Express as a physical train might have ended, but the Orient Express as an idea was immortal. In 1982, an American businessman named James Sherwood bought several original Orient Express cars at auction. He spent millions restoring them to their 1920s glory, and he launched the Venice Simplon Orient Express, a luxury tourist train running from London to Venice. This wasn't the original Orient Express. It didn't go to Istanbul. It wasn't even the same route. But it used the name, it used the brand, and it worked. The Venice Simplon Orient Express is still running today. It charges thousands of dollars per ticket. It's booked months in advance, and passengers love it because they're not buying transportation, they're buying the legend. They're buying the idea of the Orient Express. The fact that it's not the original route doesn't matter. The fact that it's explicitly a tourist service, not real transportation, doesn't matter. The brand is what matters. And this reveals the fourth and final secret. The Orient Express never really existed as the single, unchanging, legendary train we imagine. It was always a brand, always a marketing concept, always adapting and changing beneath a consistent surface. And that's exactly why it survived for so long, and why it still exists today, decades after the last real Orient Express ran. Think about what this means. The Orient Express we remember, the one from Agatha Christie novels and old movies, is a composite. It's bits and pieces from different eras, different routes, different trains, all blended together into one idealized image. The route we picture might be from 1889. The luxury we imagine might be from the 1920s. The mystery and intrigue might be from the 1930s. The Cold War drama might be from the 1960s. We've taken a century of different trains and different routes and compressed them into one legendary train that never actually existed in that form. But that's not a criticism. That's the genius of it. The Compagnie Internationale des Wagons Lits understood something profound. They understood that what they were really selling wasn't a train or a route, it was a story, an idea, a promise. And as long as they could keep that story consistent, they could change everything else. They could adapt to wars, to political upheaval, to technological change, to economic shifts. The Orient Express could be whatever it needed to be as long as it remained the Orient Express in name and in legend. This is why the Orient Express is still famous today. Not because it was the best train, not because it had the best route, not even because it was the most luxurious, though it certainly was luxurious. It's famous because it was the most adaptable, the most flexible, the most willing to change while appearing to stay the same. Modern brands are still learning this lesson. Apple isn't really a computer company anymore, but the brand stays consistent. Amazon started selling books and now sells everything, but the brand stays consistent. The most successful brands are the ones that can evolve while maintaining their core identity. The Orient Express understood this a century before modern marketing theory caught up. So what's the secret behind the Orient Express that nobody talks about? It's this. The Orient Express was never real. It was always a myth, a carefully constructed and maintained myth that adapted to reality while never acknowledging that it was changing. It was a magic trick, a brilliant, century-long magic trick that convinced the world that one legendary train was running one legendary route, when in reality it was dozens of trains running dozens of routes, all hiding behind one legendary name. And the most remarkable thing? Even now, knowing the truth, the magic still works. The legend is still powerful. The name still means something. The Venice Simplon Orient Express still sells out. People still dream of riding the Orient Express. Because the myth is more powerful than the reality ever was. The Orient Express proved that if you can create a strong enough story, if you can build a powerful enough brand, you can survive anything. Wars, political upheaval, technological change, economic collapse. You can change everything about your product while keeping your legend intact. You can be a completely different thing every decade while remaining the same thing in people's minds. That's the secret, that's the truth. The Orient Express was never one train, it was an idea. And ideas, unlike trains, can run forever. So here's my question for you. Does knowing the truth change how you feel about the Orient Express legend? Does it make it less romantic or more impressive? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the secret behind the Orient Express, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We've got more hidden truths about legendary trains coming your way. Until next time, remember that the best legends aren't built on truth. They're built on stories. And the Orient Express told the greatest railway story ever told.